One of the most incredible things about the Canadiens' 1993 Stanley Cup championship is that they won 10 consecutive games in overtime. I don't think we'll ever see anything like that again, Pat.
No, we probably won't. There were several records involving overtime in that in the playoffs that year. There were 28 overtime games total. The Canadiens lost their first one, actually, in Quebec City in Game 2, and then they won 10 in a row. The other record is John LeClair scored back-to-back overtime winners in the final series against Los Angeles, both games in L.A., and that's a record also. It's the only time anyone's ever had back-to-back overtime winners in the playoffs.
Now, Julian, I know you weren't born when they won the Cup in '93, but have you watched any of that on YouTube or the overtime
Like,
goals?
they're definitely
What's
out
your
there.
sense of it?
Like, that seems ridiculous, the fact that, you know, you can go through all those overtime games and win. I think they lost their first overtime game as well, right? Records are made to be broken, so while I get that, you know, a lot of people think, oh, there's no way some team could ever win 10 straight overtime wins, get 10 straight overtime wins, it wouldn't surprise me for some weird reason, because of how unpredictable the Stanley Cup playoffs could be, some team in the next few years just wins like 11, which would be ridiculous in itself. And it's not even like you can predict, like, oh, hey, you know what, the Pittsburgh Penguins are such a good overtime team, they could win games in overtime 11 in a row. There's no way you could ever predict that. So I'm not going to say it's never going to happen, but it is pretty impossible.
Sort of like no expansion team could ever win the Stanley Cup. Right?
Yeah, and look, Vegas is in the final.
Here's the thing. It would have to be a team that went to the final.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you would have to get to, you know...
Or 3 rounds.
Or
Really?
3 rounds.
Yeah, well,
at least 3 rounds.
yeah.
It won't happen.
No,
it won't happen. They'll break DiMaggio's record before they break that one. It's just, it's so improbable, the circumstances. And I think it is what sets Patrick apart. I know there were a lot of other factors in those games, but for a goaltender to win 10 straight overtime games and that kind of pressure cooker, nobody but Patrick could do it. That's why I say he's the greatest money goalie ever, and he was.
I know, talking with Guy Carbonneau about it, and I said, how do you explain it? He says, you can't. And he says, like, after you win 2 or 3, you don't really think about it, but then when you get to 4, 5, 6, 7, he said they felt pressure because he says, we all play cards, and you know the odds eventually are going to catch up to you, but they never did, and they went on to win.
Probably 50-50 on an overtime. So it's like flipping a coin and getting 10 straight heads. It's just...
Well, to watch
Insanely lucky.
Yeah, you know, talking
I wonder if
be
anyone
lucky.
bought a lottery ticket during that.
talking to different players over the thing, you know, some players said, you know, well, we just grew in confidence at the thing. But as you pointed out with Carbo, and, you know, other players said, you know, Matthew Snyder also said, you thought, this can't go on. We've got to lose somewhere along the line. The odds are saying we have to lose, but we kept winning.
The only surprise is that they didn't win the final game in overtime, I guess, when you look back at it.
Well, the final game, you know, LA was so defeated. You know, they had missed a chance to go 2-0 on McSorley stick incident, and then they lost the 2 games at home. And by the time they came back here, they had no will to even play that game. You saw it the day before. The NHL had to, you know, beg players to come down and meet their media responsibilities, and Gretzky came down, Barry Melrose, the coach, came down, but you could tell they were beaten before that game.
They looked and saw who was behind their bench and knew they were beaten.
Well, 10 straight overtime victories by the Canadiens. It was a special time. To watch our full HIO episode on the 1993 Canadian Stanley Cup Championship, go to hockeyinsideout.com.